We're going to talk tonight about I don't even know how to really set it up. Maybe I shouldn't set it up, but I'm going to say the situation in Gaza. It's not really the situation in Gaza. It's a bit of I don't want to sound flippant at all. It was sort of prompted by the stories this morning. The first reports coming up this morning was that Israel has bombed a hospital in Gaza. Now, there are also some groups who are countering that position and saying it didn't happen that way, that it was rockets from Hamas that misfired. And we've already seen, you probably have as well, a whole bunch of mis and disinformation going around, people showing videos of rockets doubling back on themselves, which are actually rockets from something that happened 10 years ago. That's all out there. I think you guys know me, and this will annoy some of you in my audience when I say this. Until we know 100% what's going on, we'll probably use the word allegedly or whatever. But it seems that most places that maybe aren't the IDF or Hamas, like for example Reuters, CNN, are saying that Israel has bombed a hospital in Gaza, yet they're also in all of the stories reporting that Israel is rejecting that notion, saying it was a misfire from Hamas. We're not sure how to approach that really. What the truth amongst all of that is, we'll wait and see. But for now, what I want to do is welcome Marilyn Garson to the show. She is from Alternative Jewish Voices. We want to talk about this, and also Marilyn's got a really interesting story about living in the region. So Marilyn, kia ora, welcome to the show. Thank you for being a part of us tonight.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, now I just kind of did a bit of a fumbly setup there. As the guest, you're welcome to have your own view and opinion on that if you want to share anything. And I'm probably someone who's a little bit more cautious before making an absolute statement. As I said, it kind of looks like, feels like, smells like sort of a bomb from Israel, but Israel's saying no, and we haven't had any independent group come out saying absolutely this is what happens yet. So we can talk about that. I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to get your views on that, but also there is so much more going on about the conflict in the area, and there is so much more going on about the people in the area and how they're being treated even without that event. I think we can talk through as much as you're able to and want to talk through with us. But specifically, do you want to speak to that event at all to start with?
I have heard the IDF suggest that Islamic Jihad misfired somehow. When I hear that story in its particulars, it doesn't sound credible to me. It assumes that Islamic Jihad had weapons of this caliber, that they haven't used them, and now they've decided to use them against their own people. We know that Israel has required half of the Gaza population to move, and a forcible transfer of a civilian population is a war crime. They have repeatedly said, if you don't move or whatever you do, we're going to start bombing. A couple of hours before this happened, Netanyahu said the entire responsibility for civilian safety is on Hamas, which of course Netanyahu doesn't get to say, and it's not accurate. And then a hospital is hit. I don't find it credible that this would be the moment of a misfire. So
I think from what I've read and looked at today, I'm in the same camp as you. I don't find it credible, but I guess I'm not a journalist, but my journalistic background kind of goes, until we have, you see the person stab the person with a knife, but the court still says allegedly. That's sort of the approach I take from it. Because the thing that I've seen today, and it has been from some commentators in America who have a military background, is Hamas didn't have the level of weaponry to cause that kind of damage, which is what you're saying. So I'm on the same page as you. I guess I'm just also going, we'll still see it pan out for the final part of it. But also the events that led to this are less questionable anyway. So sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying?
What's most important to me about what happened this morning is that it's a further deterioration of intolerable human suffering and collective punishment of the people in Gaza. And I think really that's the place to focus. What is happening to Gazans, and why are we doing nothing about it? Why is the first act of this incoming government, the election is over, here's this nightmare, and their response is nothing. I mean, those are, to me, the bigger questions.
Well, it could be something to do with the incoming Prime Minister's evangelical Christian background. That could be a part to do with it, and his cabinet as well. Many in his cabinet. Can we also address the situation? Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify things in an area where simplification is probably the worst tool to use, because this is a very complex issue that we can't sort out in a 10 to 15 minute conversation. But just so you know, and I've already said this to you when we talked this afternoon, but others know, me, and I think Chewy's on the same page as me, but I'll just speak for me because Chewy's not here tonight. Our heart is with the Palestinian people. You know, what they've been put through, how they've been crushed into a corner of the world, but literally behind walls, you know, without food, without power. But we also vehemently reject the actions of Hamas, for example, going into a music festival and slaughtering and killing, you know, 18 to 22-year-olds. How do we hold both those positions and not get caught out by either side saying, you know, Israel brought it on themselves and Hamas just responded, or vice versa? Hamas and the people of Palestine brought it on themselves and Israel's just retaliating? Because to me, there seems more nuance in that.
I think it's a matter of where you set the frame. But clearly, history did not begin last week.
Yeah.
So there's been an occupation for 75 years. There's been a blockade of Gaza for 17 years. There is this year escalating violence on the part of settlers backed by the Israeli army. You can call all of that provocation without excusing the attack and the abuse on civilians. So I would say, if you hide people behind a wall for 17 years, they're going to come out. Something was going to happen at some point. No one outside of military intelligence could have guessed what. What happened in Israel included war crimes, and provocation does not justify or excuse war crimes. And then what Hamas did may have triggered, but neither justifies nor excuses the overwhelming and ongoing crimes in Gaza, which we must stop. That's how I hold it in my hands. There are two tasks that need doing immediately. One is a ceasefire and the restoration of humanitarian aid. And two is somehow to address the causes and work toward a solution. This cannot be just one more round of violence. And at some point, for God's sakes, let the people who have committed crimes, people who acted, people who set the orders of battle, let them go to an international court.
Do you think in that future international court there will be people from Hamas and from Israel both being tried for war crimes?
I'm not a judge of this, and I'm not a war crimes lawyer. But we do know that to attack civilians intentionally is a crime. To kill and kidnap civilians is a crime. We also know that 2.3 million people in Gaza are held behind a wall. They are being collectively punished. Attacks are targeting residential buildings, and now there is this forcible transfer of a civilian population. Those all seem like crimes. Some of them are vast, and some of them are smaller.
Yeah, I mean, I guess thank you for that answer. I guess my position, being far more ignorant than yourself and others in this, is that it appears to me war crimes are being attributed to both sides and committed by both sides. You know, if the incursion into the music festival was a military action by the government of Gaza, Hamas, if it was, then that's a war crime. But I wanted to say as well, sorry, do you want to respond?
I agree with that. And I think there are decades of crimes that need investigation, you know, and until this round of violence, not counting this round of violence, the casualties in this situation, in this occupation, have been roughly 20 to 1. 20 Palestinians died for 1 Israeli. So there really is a need for some perspective. Where are the preponderance of crimes? Where should the preponderance of our urgent attention go? The people of Gaza can still be saved.
Yeah, and within a setting of violence, be it a war or an interaction, there is rules, crazy word to use, around a proportionate response. And you can't sit on, this is why I think there has to be some kind of cognitive dissonance going on for people supporting Israel wholeheartedly, because they go, innocent people were killed at the music festival or in the houses or incursions into there, so Israel can do whatever they want, as Israel's killing innocent people in buildings by pancaking them. Like it doesn't make any sense at all. And that's why I have kind of said in a clunky way, there seems to be no good guys here on the ones who are battling, and sort of badness everywhere. Now, the people who aren't battling are the people of Gaza and the people of Israel. I heard someone say today, it was a pro-Israel figure, that, these people voted Hamas in. And for clarity, so people know this, the average age in Gaza at the moment is 19 years old. And the last election was in 2006, I believe, which means that's 14 years ago. That means most of the population in Gaza have never participated in an election. So these people did not vote for this government in Gaza. A generation before them did, yet it seems that many are holding those behind the wall, those in Gaza, the citizens of Gaza, responsible for this by saying, well, you elected them. In fact, that was literally what the person said. You elected them. And that's not the case. Now, you've lived in Gaza for 4 years. Is that correct? Can you speak to that? Can you tell us of your experience?
Well, let me just quickly speak to the election business.
Sure.
Because it seems to me that Israelis voted in Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Smotrich a whole lot more recently. So you have to be very careful what happens with that argument. You voted for them, you're responsible for them.
True.
In Gaza, when I was there was talk of an election, and this is 9 years ago. And the joke was that if they really held elections today, Hamas would win in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority would win in Gaza, because everywhere throughout Palestine, people were so disgusted and they were ready to say none of the above.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I lived under Hamas for 4 years, and I have repeatedly written that I have no fondness for them. I regard them as an unfortunate consequence of occupation. Hamas has never made any bones about the fact that their role, they say, is to form a society whose core principle is resistance. And I can understand that perhaps what they have done is the only way to build that society. I don't know if there is a nice way to build that society. But what I do know clearly, and Gazans said it to me over and over, is that Hamas is not Gaza, and Gaza is not Hamas. And it's a deadly shorthand to talk about bombing Hamas. There is no place called Hamas.
Yeah.
There is no distinct guilty place called Hamas. Those bombs land on a crowded, overwhelmingly civilian place called Gaza.
Why did you move there? Why did you live there for 4 years?
I had just finished 5 years of work in Afghanistan. And on the strength of that, I got an unsolicited email, and someone said, would you take this job in Gaza? Because we're having trouble recruiting. It's a long odds position to do job creation behind a blockade. And with a couple of conversations, I said, okay. So I went to Gaza, and I was so overwhelmed by the education I was getting there and the opportunity that I found there to create jobs that I stayed for 4 years.
And tell me your experience. Did you ever get caught up in situations between Israel and Gaza? Were there ever any attacks or any violence while you were there?
I lived there through the wars of 2014 and the 51-day bombardment of the short war of 2014 and the 51-day bombardment of 2014. It was shorter in 2012. Yeah, so I was a part of the UNRWA emergency shelter management team in 2014.
What happens? Like, I'm thinking, because there's such roadblocks to everything getting into Gaza, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
When a building, I don't want to make this sound flippant, but when a building falls, what happens to that space? How do they rebuild? What do they do? Or does that building just never get rebuilt and the population keeps getting squashed tighter and tighter and tighter? Because how do you get the stuff to rebuild it in Gaza?
At the end of 2014, it was a shocking, absolutely physically shocking, paralyzing thing to drive around Gaza and see the millions of tons of rubble of places that had been a familiar landscape. You know, I went to Shujaiya, the homes of 92,000 people were rubble.
Wow.
And people begin to clear the rubble, and they salvage what can be salvaged. And there's a beautiful extension of the Gaza port, which is made from recycled blocks of rubble, still with the rebars sticking out of it. And piece by piece, buildings get rebuilt. And that involves getting concrete, getting everything in through the goods crossings that have now been bombed. And in the wake of every military action, you see the reports about Israel obstructing the import of whatever is needed to rebuild. I don't know how they will face it this time.
Is this bombardment going to be worse? Like, we didn't play this clip. Actually, Chewy showed me the clip after we finished, maybe on Monday night, where a reporter, I could probably find it, maybe I'll find it and show it to the audience after we finish speaking, but a reporter was being watched by the Israeli police, and the reporter started screaming at the policeman started screaming at the reporter to tell the truth. And then the policeman got in front of the camera and said, we will raise Gaza to the ground. Like, he stood in front of the camera and screamed it at the camera. Is this worse? Like, is what's going on now going to be worse? And how is this going to play out in your opinion?
It's grossly worse. One of the things that I did in 2014 was to monitor the shelter populations. So I can say that we were receiving around 1,000 people per hour, 24 hours a day. In the opening days here, as far as I could track, the displacement was 2 to 3 times faster. We had an airlift. They face a total blockade now. It's unimaginable, and my imagination has already been through what had been one of the most intensive, protracted bombardments. This is unimaginable, but you've also pointed to a really important thing, and I want to just draw it out a bit.
Please.
To be in Gaza, or to be Palestinian now, is to stand in front of this genocidal language. In 2014, the Minister of Justice spoke about the little snakes of Gaza and said, you need to bomb the homes where the little snakes will be born. You need to kill the mothers who will give birth to the little snakes. This time, it's not even, there's no attempt to hide it. They're subhuman, they're animals. This is genocidal, dehumanizing language. It is terrifying to stand in front of that without significant defensive weapons. And you know, you're facing one of the most highly subsidized modern armies in the world, and the permissiveness of Western governments. It's terrifying.
Yeah. What role do you think America should play in this, if any? I mean, they've already obviously got their hands all over it, and there's a lot of people at the moment. In fact, I think I saw, what's his name, Russell Brand, who's gone to the dark side, talking today about, will they trace any of these rockets from Hamas to America and Joe Biden? And I was just thinking, what about, the other rockets from the other side that are made in America and sold to Israel? But I mean, it always comes across to me as almost an incestuous relationship between A, the evangelical Christian, which is probably the basis of B, the American relationship to Israel as well. Like I'm not saying you can't have allies, but it seems more than that, incestuous. I've never really understood it.
So, A, you cannot fund this assault and then present yourself as a goodwill broker. And I think that is finally in tatters, if anyone doubted it before.
Right.
I can say that one of the things that we did in 2014, I don't know if anyone has the resources to do it now, is to collect fragments from the buildings, the shelter schools, the buildings that are removed from combat, which were nonetheless bombed. We collected fragments. And that helps to trace the source of the bombs. And I suspect someone will come up with fragments from the hospital this morning and make it clear where those bombs came from.
So that will be probably the proof needed to finalize this, like I was saying before about allegedly, but in a court type situation. That'll be the evidence that's needed.
It's coming, trust me.
Yeah, I think one of the things I saw the IDF saying was that they've got recordings of militants saying that they were firing rockets in that region and they're going to release the audio soon. And I just thought, well, if you've got the recordings, surely you'd release it immediately. The longer that takes to come out, the more suspicious one should be of that recording.
Yeah. I also think you've pointed to something that we underplay in New Zealand, and that is the extent to which the Zionist voices, even here, are Christian.
Yeah, for sure.
A number of the prominent Zionist organizations and the so-called anti-Semitism and Holocaust organizations are actually Christian organizations. When we went to Parliament to present a petition that was run by Justice for Palestine, a couple of busloads of Christian Zionists arrived to try to disrupt the petition handover. And their overt racism was kind of shocking. Big posters that said Palestinians are not ready for self-determination or self-government. I mean, they are here. It's always wrong to present this as a Palestinian-Jewish issue. It is also wrong to present Zionism as simply a Jewish initiative.
Yeah, and I think that sort of has to be the way in New Zealand, though, doesn't it? Because the Jewish population is very small, like numbers just in the thousands, doesn't it? Of, like if you look at the census.
Yeah, in the last census, I believe there were 7,000 self-declared Jews and 20,000 self-declared Jedi warriors.
So what I hear you saying is we need to get New Zealanders Jedis into this cause. Maybe that'll give a better outcome.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
It's nice to laugh in this conversation, Marilyn, because to be honest, it's pretty depressing all around, isn't it, for everyone? Do you still have connections and contacts with people in Gaza now? Have you been speaking or communicating with them?
Absolutely. I had a friend who was on that so-called safe corridor from the north to the south when it was bombed. Another Gazan friend who has immigrated to New Zealand has lost, I think, 7 members of her immediate family.
Wow.
Every morning I wake up and I look at the messages and I don't know who's going to be alive and who's not. And that is the experience of every Palestinian in this country now.
Wow. It's terrifying. Where do we go from here, Marilyn, both in this interview and in the situation? How do we move forward? What do you want to see? What does the world need to see happening next? And we're not going to find a solution, obviously, but what do we do? What's the next move for the world?
We, being the world, also being New Zealand, we need to stop this. The reports from the Israeli Office of the Controller from past wars, they have acknowledged that Israel bombed until the world pressure made them stop. We need to be moving our governments right now to make this stop. And then we need to ensure that this is the last violence. That can only happen when we start to address cause, when we acknowledge that Palestinians have the same rights that we have, including the right to self-determination.
Yeah. So complete ceasefire, both sides, stop now, and then a proper and real negotiation. Do you see any way of moving forward without the Palestinians being given their occupied land back? Like, how does that, because that seems to obviously be the biggest hurdle in this a lot of the time, is it's like, this is our land, no, it's our land, no, it's our land. Is that, how does that work? Or from being there, from living there, could the people in Gaza just happily live amongst, Israelis, live in peace? What do you think?
Well, you need to remember that Palestine predates Israel. So the matter of giving back, who has a right to, that is a matter of which dates you choose to acknowledge. The Gazans that I knew went to great lengths to tell their children stories that would spare them bitterness and enmity. They know that I'm a Jew. I mean, can people resolve this kind of rage that exists between them? Yes, I think it takes a few generations, and I think the world needs to make an investment in making that happen. But please don't ask me who should go where, because those are questions for the people who live there.
Yeah.
Is that Palestinians have had no say in it.
Yeah.
Let's just let's require that conversation, that project to happen.
How does that even happen? If you say, what I heard you saying before about the US is they kind of can't be involved in negotiation now because they've been funding so much of the literal explosions. So how does that even work? Does there need to be a Jordan get involved? Does there need to be a third party get involved? Does there need to be the UN get involved? How does that even work?
I'm sure there does need someone to step in between them. There are also projects. For example, there's the One Democratic State campaign. There are a few projects with similar names in Israel where Palestinians and Israelis are sitting around a table and saying, how could we do this? Could we all meet our bottom lines? What would it look like? I encourage those conversations, because those are the conversations that none of the leaders have the courage to hold.
I think the other thing I was just going to mention is, we're talking about the actions of Hamas not necessarily reflecting the people in Gaza who are now suffering. I saw a stat today saying 3 out of 4 Israelis are disgusted by what the Israeli government's doing as well. So it seems like, as is always the case with war, it's the citizens who don't want to be involved, and those at the top running the countries who are doing it, saying they're representing their country, and the citizens are like, bro, this ain't us. We're not in this. This isn't us. So I'm not trying to play sort of whataboutism by saying, oh, the Israeli people, but it seems like the Israeli people also don't want a part of this, and obviously as do the people in Gaza as well. So if we took our our perspective from what to do for those people as to how to bring peace to those governments, that might be a better place to start.
I agree with that. I've also seen polls that say confidence in the Israeli government is collapsing. And could it be? I don't know. Let's look at the protests that were happening earlier before this. Yeah. Could it be that that enough people in Israel have had a look at the nightmare government that they elected and said, Christ, we've got to pull back from this? Could it be? Maybe that's a piece of the turning point.
Yeah. So maybe there'll be an internal uprising. I mean, I'm not saying the Arab Spring has had the best result, a decade later, but, a ground roots, internal citizens of Israel might be the ones to solve this problem by doing something with their government, by moving their government on, by bringing in a more progressive, a group that wants to bring peace to the region as opposed to what is there now. Maybe. I don't know.
And by hearing from Jews around the world who say, you've lost the plot.
Well, I'll make sure that Bibi gets this video. I'll send it to him, Marilyns, so he can watch it for himself.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. I very much have appreciated talking to you. The chat's been going bananas while we've been chatting. Everyone's enjoyed having you here, and I hope we get to touch base again really, really soon. Just thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.